Phil Strong from Palo Alto Medical Foundation. I'm a hospitalist and also do a fair amount of things with our electronic health record. My title in administration is physician champion for specialty clinical analytics, and that's how I got involved with our clinical genetics groups locally. A couple of things you need to know about me. One will be evident by the time we get to the end of this presentation. I'm pretty much terminally left brain, so apologies in advance. And then I'm personally opposed to neckties. And when presentations started coming through IDSA on the infectious potential for neckties, as a hospitalist, I took it seriously and abandoned neckties from that point forwards. So Palo Alto Medical Foundation is in the Bay Area, mostly on the south part of the Bay. It's a not-for-profit medical foundation. There are 4 divisions at Palo Alto covering the various regions. The Palo Alto region, Camino, where I'm based, Santa Cruz, and also Alameda in the East Bay. We have about 5,000 employees now geographically distributed across that area. We also now have about 1,200 partner or partnership track physicians. These are, we like to call these not employed physicians. That is, they're not unemployed, but they're not employed by Palo Alto Medical Foundation. Typical California thing. And we are an affiliate of Sutter Health. Sutter Health is a larger organization, 26 hospital, not-for-profit healthcare organization in Northern California, basically from the Nevada border to the Pacific Ocean in the distribution of the drainage area of the Sacramento River and its tributaries. We are in that region along with Mills Peninsula Hospital. Although we don't work directly with Mills typically at Palo Alto Medical Foundation, we have a number of initiatives where we're working together. And one of the key things about us, we used to do a lot of our own IT and system configuration in-house. We have now outsourced that to Sutter Health Information Services. And so as you might imagine, that kind of slows down initiatives to do innovative projects locally. So this is about the only right brain slide I have in here that has photographs that show kind of where we were. And I want to talk a little bit about clinical decision support options at Palo Alto Medical Foundation. We basically have 2 varieties. Some are the standard clinical decision support tools, custom configured initially by us and now more recently by Sutter within the EHR. And then there's a number of initiatives, probably the most interesting initiatives, I think, that are essentially external to the EHR. And these usually involve data that is stored in a variety of different databases. We don't really have a common data warehouse in our system for doing things like this. So we'll store data somewhere and we'll set up a team that is organized to work that data so that we can find and identify patients who might benefit from particular interventions such as testing. I think that's actually fairly common around the country. Inside of the EHR, I don't want to underemphasize the importance of data display for making decisions, and there are a number of options now available to us. One of the more interesting ones is something that Epic calls Synopsis, and that allows you to combine information across a variety of categories and display it essentially in a timeline, graphically or not, to help you make decisions on behalf of patients. It's typically pretty badly underconfigured. So like right now we only have Synopsis configured for a couple of conditions. We're about to go live with Beacon, the oncology system, for Epic. When that happens, Synopsis takes on a whole new different meaning for us because it actually is pretty well configured for use in oncology. There's the standard Epic tool, health maintenance reminders. There's also the incredibly flexible best practice alerts that we see a lot of. However, we've been very cautious with those. And I think that's primarily because of alert fatigue, very important. Most of the alerts that come out of our electronic healthcare system are the consequence of third-party drug allergy, drug interaction software, and most of them have questionable utility. In other words, we blow past most of them when we see them. And there's been a number of presentations by folks over the years who've tried to trim that down. I've seen people cut down more than 75% of the alerts with no adverse impact on patient care presented in a number of different forums. So that's something we need to work on. This is the recommendation folks have been talking about here. This is actually pretty important for us to get stuff done inside of our IT infrastructure. This is that U.S. Preventive Services Task Force recommendation for screening for genetic counseling. These are the items in it. And basically, primary care providers, it's recommended that they screen women who have family members with breast or ovarian cancer with one of several screening tools, and they list them, designed to identify family history that may be associated with increased risk for potentially harmful mutations in breast cancer susceptibility genes. Women with a positive screen should receive genetic counseling, and if indicated by counseling, BRCA testing. So that actually has a huge impact on us, and I'll describe that in a second. In what we've been thinking and what we're likely to do going forward. And then the other part of the recommendation is that they recommend against routine genetic counseling or routine BRCA testing for women whose family history is not associated with increased risk. So a recommendation for and a recommendation against, depending on the positive screen based on questionnaires. This is an example of one of the tools. It happens to be one that doesn't really have any sort of intellectual property or licensing consequences. Not all of the tools that are recommended in there are free of intellectual property concerns. So that's something we're going to be having to think of. But these are all very straightforward questions. Although they are straightforward questions, they're typically not answered in the family history sections in our EHR. And what does that look like? This is what we're faced with. In the current version, this is actually the 2010 release of Epicare. We're about to go live with 2012. And the good news is that it's really, really flexible. You can put anything in there. Fantastic. The bad news is it's free text, largely, with very little structure. So that means there's really almost no actionable data for us clinicians in using this. And the usage of this family history tool prior to meaningful use has been pretty pitifully poor. As a hospitalist, I go through this on every patient I admit just to review the family history, and it's most often blank, like 80%. So maybe we hit it. So just like I was saying, the questions that you really want answered in your questionnaire, and here's a couple from NCCN guidelines. 2 or more blood relatives from the same side of the family with a history of breast cancer. Good luck trying to get that out of the family history section in EPIC. Or 1 or more blood relatives with a history of breast cancer and at least one of the following additional conditions, and the list has actually 10 elements. Again, that's not likely to be answered in your commercial EHR. And in fact, some of us have come away thinking that generic family history, that is, as opposed to focused family history, seems to be infrequently useful to us and perhaps not so useful in screening in advance of genetic testing. So what is useful? This led us on a fair journey, which is still in progress. We have a managed care director who was very passionate, starting 5 years ago, to try to identify patients who might be BRCA positive. And based on our population statistics, we estimated that we currently identify about 40%, meaning we miss another 60%. So our initial thoughts were, well, why don't we try to do some kind of a screening questionnaire for folks? Maybe that'll help us. And we went to a variety of folks who were doing this or had already done it. And there were a lot of limitations in that approach. For one thing, it's in mammography. And by the time women get to mammography for screening, you're going to miss most of the younger women who might be at risk and who might benefit from an intervention much earlier. And then once we realized, we looked at UCSF, Athena. Their technology was actually incompatible with what we're planning to do. And we also came out to Intermountain Health and got to meet with Grant and Nathan, who was in the back. And we made kind of a deal with them. We would work on an algorithm that was based on NCCN, the NCCN guideline. So NCCN is, not proprietary intellectual property, and there isn't actually an algorithm in there, but you can derive an algorithm from it. So we did that, and they basically showed me how to write the code to put it on an iPad. So between the two of us, we came up with this approach. And we made it available open source to folks, such as it was. And then as we looked at it, we realized we needed to take it through focus groups because, for one thing, our initial version had a big red warning sign to women who had a positive screen that you need to do something. That was very alarming, and we didn't want to go there. So we took it through focus groups. We made a number of modifications to the application. And then, once again, we were ready to deploy it, and we ran into two problems. One was workflow in mammography suites. So amazingly, they're already doing a pretty extensive questionnaire when women come in for their mammograms. It didn't take much for us to add the questions to that screening questionnaire. Basically, we added 6 to a total. Now they have about 30. And from those 6, we can now derive the Tyer-Cusick risks for patients' chances of having a BRCA mutation. So we went there, and then the California law hit. Now there's a state law that says that we have to do 2 things when women come in for mammograms. We have to report that if they have high breast density, we have to let them know that. And in addition, we have to let them know about their risk of breast cancer. So luckily, we were able to build that into the mammogram system because now our mammogram reports have 2 additional pieces of information. One is the breast density, and the second one is the risk via Tyer-Cusick of having a genetic mutation. And we thought we'd done a decent job there, and then the U.S. Public Health Services Task Force recommendation came out, and now we're faced with trying to do something in primary care. Talk about workflow issues. That's big. So primary care does have an aspect of breast and ovarian cancer risk for sure, but it's actually much larger than that. And as we move out into primary care, how are we going to do this? How are we going to come up with something that doesn't take a terrible amount of time and still allows us to screen for, yes, breast and ovarian cancer, but perhaps for other things? Therefore, there's actually a greater aggregate workflow burden, and it dawned on us that we probably have to stage screening questionnaires. So a basic screening questionnaire based on essential patient demographics, like you wouldn't want to screen necessarily women for prostate cancer risk. That probably doesn't make a lot of sense. But beyond that, after you get past the first initial screen, you'd probably want to tee up a second screen. And then after that, you may want to tee up the ability to put a full online pedigree that's kind of condition specific on board for patients. I think that's the direction we're going to head. So now that we've done all this, we're basically on a path to put up in Epicare a native online first stage screening questionnaire for women primarily designed to meet the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force recommendation. It's going to be difficult within the current version of Epicare to go beyond that, but we probably will at some point. At the same time, we're looking at some third-party questionnaire tools that allow you to work with data from your EHR. And folks from Geisinger are probably aware of some of the vendors that are doing this because we're learning from them. So after that, we'd like to be able to begin to deploy staged questionnaires. So we may have our basic questionnaire in Epic and then launch a second stage questionnaire for somebody after they sort of screen positive during the first one. And this was one of the biggest surprises for me. It turns out that right now, at least, the primary data for risk assessment is actually from questionnaires. Not necessarily from family history data, not necessarily from the rest of the EHR, but now, at least in our first stage for Preventive Services Task Force, it's question-answer sequences that you acquire at a point in time. And that could result in the development of condition-specific pedigrees for folks, but we think that's probably not going to happen until the patient actually sees a genetic counselor in most instances. So that's kind of what we think is going to happen next. At PAMF, there's a few other things to talk about. Genomics. Right now we get our results essentially on paper. And the paper gets scanned in. But that means that it's really not actionable. There's no electronic clinical decision support that we can put up around it. Right now, family history and genomics for the foreseeable couple of years boils down to developing, deploying, and sequencing screening questionnaires to determine who really needs additional pedigree analysis and genetic counseling. Genomics is in its infancy. I think we're going to have to depend on others to curate the data and notify us when we need to contact patients. That's one of the reasons we've been interested in Gene Insight, actually. But I think there's a parallel path for family history data potentially available. And one of the rules of commercial EHRs is they always lag, especially as you get into specialties. And so you still have to innovate, and eventually you may be able to move some of those innovations into the EHR, but doing the innovation really helps justify its use. In terms of IT priorities, again, that establishing widespread acceptance of a reliable curator of genomics and maybe family history data could be really, really helpful. We want to build support within commercial EHRs for them for handling alerts and updates. And I think Ken's approach for OpenCDS incredibly promising in this area. And we still need to work on a standard cascade of questionnaires to help determine genetic risks. And because they are basically tests, we need to fully understand their test characteristics, specificity, sensitivity, the other aspects of testing in general. So this just replicates that. A quick word on open source software. We did ours as open source, and licensing is the key there to determine how the thing is going to be used. A good license that enables no strings attached sharing is actually the Apache 2 license, so I'd recommend that. Open source algorithms can be tougher. When you find them, they are pearls of great value. We've been looking in government and certain not-for-profits to find these. Really like what we found in NCCN, but it doesn't have its test characteristics determined. That's something we'd like to do going forward. And there may be a role for this in lowering the cost for screening widely available, making that available to widely to underserved populations going forward by reducing the cost. So that's everything I had.